Back on the Buick. It's been a little while. Anyway, I'm going to approach a problem that has been, at least perceived to be a problem, for decades. So in here we got a start engine and I've got a relay here. When you go to start your car, you need to put a little dust in here. Anyway, you can see it on the screen. When you go to start, it puts 12 volts to the solenoid on the starter motor, and on this car there is a ballast resistor which is around here in this instance. There's another one. There's an old one that used to be used, and there's one that is actually being used. I tried to pull that one off and got a bit stuck. I'll do that. But anyway, so we need to have 12 volts to this coil when you're starting to give it a good spark, but when it's running, it runs through this ballast resistor here on the wall here. So when you go on the start on the ignition switch, when you go into the start position, it provides the 12 volts to the coil, and then when you go to the run position, it goes through the resistor to the coil. Now all of this is a mess. This all got caught up in this coupling down here. Just after I got it running, this got stranded about an hour away at my dad's place for nearly a month, and it just took a bit of work to get it starting back again. I don't know. Anyway, we won't go into that. But when I was about to come back from, the assumption was that the ignition switch was no good, no bueno on the when you go into the. So you got that's you got run. You can hear the pump running, but you go into the run position, the start position, and nothing happens. So what happened was Dad put in a not momentary, an on-off switch, and he ran a hot wire straight back to the battery, and I did actually reference that in a previous video when I was fixing up the battery terminals. And then he put that switch, a wire from there, straight to the coil. So he'd pull on this switch to get it to put the hot to the coil, and then there was a push button switch, and that push button was the wire to the solenoid on the starter motor. And I actually burned out over the years. The coil was burned out twice that I'm aware of. I was outside, there was a really major oil leak. So this is the oil filter up the top, and there's some really hard to get to bits down here where the stuff comes up. It was put up there in Australia because we've got the steering on this side, and it goes straight where the oil filter would be, or at least you can't get to it. So in the Valiants, I think probably you wouldn't be able to get to it. This is a Valiant steering column. Anyway, so I was out here. I made up a special spanner, or ground up a special spanner, to get to this terrible thing to stop the leak. And so I was reaching in here and push buttons and whatever, and the car started and there was no leak, and I thought, oh cool, okay. So I sort of tied it up and shut the bonnet and went for a drive, and the next thing, I've driven for 10 minutes with the 12 volts onto the coil, forgetting to turn it off, burned the coil out. So I decided I was not going to do that again. So I put in this push button and a wire in this relay so that it would do, and I wired in that relay so it would do the job of both switches. When you push this one, it provides both. Now looking back at it, I don't even know that I needed that relay, but it wasn't hard to do. I put in an extra little fuse box when I was in here. There's a little fuse box here, and rewired it a bit, but it's all sort of patchwork. There's the main fuse box not mounted, and it's an absolute nightmare under here, so I'm going to do a tidy up. But first things first, what I realised, and if you listen, maybe you can hear it. So there's on. There's a click coming from under the in the bonnet. So I came around here, and underneath here there's this. Now it's wobbly and mounted with a dodgy screw, but that's a relay here, and there's a pin. I don't know whether you can see here, but there's a pin here that's not being used. And I thought, I got my wife to click the button, the run into start position in the ignition switch, and this is clicking. So I got a test light, which, you know, dodgy little test light, but it works, and put it onto that spade. Got my wife to turn the ignition into start, and this pin turns on, this pin here. So that is the start. Then as far as the other side, I pulled this starter motor out because it stopped turning over. I blew one of my fuses underneath the dash when I was trying to get this running to bring it home from Dad's. But it stopped turning over, and here's the wiring going to the starter, and there's a bit of insulation tape, and an extra wire has been sort of wired into this. So that's kind of, oh no, there it is. It's spliced in. I don't know whether you can see, but down here it's spliced in here, and I think that was put in to go back to the coil as the 12 volts. But I pulled this out and went to a guy who in 1980, I can tell you it would have been about the mid or late June 1980, because I'd only just got my licence and it was my first car, and the generator light came on, and it was just over the hill over there. I was an apprentice just over here, and I was driving home to Nowra, which is an hour away, and it was late, because winter's, that's winter in the southern hemisphere, so it was going to get dark. And so I'd been around a little bit, and I had an idea that, you know, just up this way, over, you know, just sort of over that way now, there was an auto electrician. I drove up there, and sure enough, there was the auto electrician, and he replaced the starter motor for me, and he's still there, Frank, Magnetti Auto. Anyway, so I took it to Frank, and he straight away knew the wiring. He said, you're going to be looking for a blue and red wire, and there it is. It was a valiant wiring, you know. I don't know what I'm going to do when people like Frank are gone. He's already 70 or something, so he won't be around forever. Anyway, I brought this starter in, and I said, it's not turning over. And he said, which pin did you put it on? Did you put it on this pin or this pin? There's two spades, and I had put it onto this pin. So he put power to that pin, and the starter was fine. So I had to crawl back out in underneath and put it back in again, but at least I learned something. And what he told me is that when the solenoid switches, power goes to this pin at the same time as the through the same contact as the solenoid uses. So this spade is the connection that's supposed to provide that straight 12 volt to the coil. So my plan right now is to just get a couple of bits of wire with some spades on them and wire one wire from this here, this connection here, and take it and just put it straight down onto this one down on the starter, and get that to and check that it actually starts, you know, on the ignition switch. And then I'll also just get a bit of wire, put a couple of spades on it, hook up one here and run it around. And on this here I've got I'll have to work out which side it is, but one side of this resistor, well, that side, it goes straight to the coil, so it's got to be this side. So this wire here is off that relay, another relay here, which I may leave, but this wire here will excite that relay from that switch, that push button. If I unplug this and plug a wire from that wire on the starter motor over here, the spade on the starter motor, and run a wire from here up to there, then I think there's a fair chance that this car will start off the ignition switch. And that, if that's the case, I don't know whether it's 35 years since it's done that, but if it does, and it does so reliably, then I will just pull out the additional wiring and pull that switch off and just go to the original wiring that was in the car right from the start. So that's my mission. Well, it's quite a bit of time later. I've done a fair bit of diagnostics and learned some interesting things. I've done an initial tidy up. I've put all these cables in here. I need to tidy up this bundle down here and sort out a bit more. There's one wire here that goes to the temperature sensor, which is a little short, which is constraining all this, but at least I've got rid of a few wires that weren't doing anything, and this gets me running again. So at the end of it all, what happened was, and there's a wire down here I haven't tidied, a new wire. So there is a wire with the nice bright yellow terminator on it, spade connector, and it goes down, and you can see the nice yellow end down there. This relay here is the starter relay. So when you turn the key, it triggers that relay rather than directly going to the starter motor solenoid. Then when the solenoid, which is here, fires, this is terminal here is a positive, even though it's black, and it goes up to the battery, and the one with the yellow connector down here energizes the solenoid, and when the solenoid pulls back, it switches and pushes out the gear into the flywheel here. But at the same time, there's this terminal here, and that comes up to 12 volts, and that's what we need for our starter circuit to bypass the ballast resistor. So what happened, I think, this wire here, that brown wire here with the yellow strips on it, goes into loom and comes down at the starter motor. And there was about, I don't know, 12 mil, half inch of the insulation bed down on the bottom, just right down there, and another wire was wound onto it and taped on, and that wire came up, went in through back behind us here, and came out, and I'm still not finished in here, anything but finished, but I don't think I even need that red wire. Anyway, I'm going to move to here and start tidying this up next. But anyway, it came into here, and there was a starter push button that went straight through back to the battery without a fuse, and that was what was used to hit the to initiate the engine turning over. So that was just a direct hot wire. So I think that this wire here, I think that this wire here, if you can see, fell off and the starter stopped working. So then another wire was spliced in and run up to the temporary switch. Well, no, the bypass switch. And then when that happened, I don't know what the original circuit was, and I can't find the original wire. There is a wire down there, but it goes into lumen. I can't find it comes out, where it comes out. But that wire was supposed to go back to send the 12 volts to the coil and start, because that is what happens when you initiate. When you run the starter, it takes 12 straight off that big heavy lead and feeds it to this terminal. So what I've done is I've run that wire around the back, which all of this is going to be tidied up. I'm working on it in stages, but that wire comes around here and is going on to the plus on the terminal. So when you hit the starter, it energizes that relay. That relay fires the starter motor. When the starter motor solenoid comes on, it then puts the 12 volts hot straight to the coil, and off she goes. So, for the first time in I don't know how many decades, well, not the first time now, she starts. So I'm going to go through and look at a lot of things that are in here that are not necessary, and over time I'll replace this green wire for the temperature and run it a bit longer so that we can get all this back. I'll tie it back to this wall. But here's the ballast resistor here, and I've now just got, there's this wire here, this grey wire, is a switch 12 volt that comes on when you put the key on to run. At the moment it's hot wired into an ugly wire that's just dangling underneath the dash that I don't know where it comes from. So I'm going to trace those. I mean, there's other unterminated wires down here just hanging out from the... There's a wire that's not necessary. That was running to the... I'll put a bit of... I'll cut that off. But there was... that was an old wire that was running to the negative on the coil. That's not necessary. When I put this new engine electronic ignition module in, I think that wire was redundant. So I've disconnected that. I had two to the negative terminal here. But basically, I will go through bit by bit by bit, and I want to keep this running so I can take it for drives and all. But as I work it out and tidy things up, I'll start in underneath the dash and really start to look at that. And I'm even thinking I wouldn't mind, I've got the original, Dad kept the original dash, and that's out of the Valiant Regal, 1974 Regal. So I'm tempted to take that out, put the original one back in, and sort of work with servos and so forth, re-engineer the panel so it'll work electronically if necessary. But that's a win. So the important question is, and this is something that you learn when you do problem finding and so forth, when you describe the problem, don't say that the ignition switch is broken, say the ignition switch isn't switching the starter. And then when you start off with that rather than it's broken, you start looking, and then you might find that there's actually a wire falling off the coil. They start a relay, and then things start working again. Like I said, I don't know where the wire that originally ran from the solenoid to put the 12 to the coil was, where it ended up. But yes, stage 1 of the tidy up, plenty more. I've just done this temporary thing. I've used about 5 cents worth of cable ties just to get us to a point where it's looking a bit neater and I can follow what's going on. But that's, in the end, I'll wind it as a loom when I can get enough, when I'm satisfied and I've got it to a point where I'm finished. So there you go, mystery solved.